Hi, I'm Mercedes Fobb at the Captured on Canvas studio. Welcome to Picture This. For today's painting, picture this. We're going to have a nice springy scene with a soft blue sky. We're going to have some coral tulips, some grass, some flower pots, and cute little bunnies popping out. Before we get started, we'll make sure that we have everything in front of us. Most importantly, on my easel, I have this blank 16 by 20 standing vertically. I'm going to have a cup of water and a sponge for cleaning my brushes. And for my brushes today, I'm going to be using actually kind of a handful. I have my largest 1-inch flat tip brush. I have just this little bit smaller, a 3/4 flat tip. I'm going to have a 1/4-inch flat tip brush for kind of middle-sized things. And last but not least, a really tiny brush for tiny detail. Next on my paint palette, I'm going to have the basic primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, as well as a lot of white, some black, burnt sienna, and some orange. To get started, I always start with the background and paint the closest thing last. That being said, I'm going to be coloring in this entire canvas a nice sky blue. So I'm going to start with my largest brush, that 1-inch brush, and to mix that sky blue, I'm going to start with a big old scoop of white and add a little bit of blue. So I'm just going to plop that somewhere on my palette away from the other colors here. I want it to be at least the size of like maybe 2/4. I want a lot because this is a big canvas. Take a little bit of blue in the corner of my brush and mix that in, trying to keep it in a nice little pile. And I'm slowly going to add blue until I get a color that I like. So feeling pretty good about that. So what I'm going to do here is coloring in that canvas. I'm going to use a really long brush strokes going all the way across. That way if the color's a little see-through, at least it kind of goes with the horizon line. And I'm also going to paint the sides of my canvas as I go. I always like to paint the sides, makes it look more finished. And now that I got my background all blue, I might just add a little bit of white. You can leave it as is, but I always like to add a little bit of cloud to it. So if you just take a little bit of white on your brush, you don't even have to clean it. You can just lightly dance your brush back and forth in a few spots. And once I got a few in there and I like it how it is, I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. So now you can let this dry a little bit, but sometimes I like to leave the background a little wet when I do the next step here. We're going to do some greens for our background, some tall grass, and sometimes I like it when it blends in with that light blue a little bit, kind of creates a little bit more variance in the color. I'm going to use that 3/4-inch flat tip brush. I like to use a little bigger brush. Sometimes you might want to use a little smaller one. But this case, I'm going to mix a nice lime green color. So I'm going to start with a big scoop of white, get my brush all warmed up here, and add a good scoop of yellow. So I should have like a medium pastel yellow here. And I'm going to make that lime green with just a drop of blue. Little bit will go a long ways. All right, so I'm just going to wipe off any extra paint off my brush, and I'm going to use the thin side of my brush. So when doing this step, I'm going to hold that brush standing vertically and do flicks upward so that the grass will naturally come to a little point. This will also be used for the stems of my tulips later too. So I'm going to start in the middle here. I want to go pretty heavy in the middle because eventually I'm going to have a flower pot here and here. So I kind of want to fill in the gap where I'm going to have them later. Sometimes I like to pick up my canvas and put it on that edge too. That helps me get to the bottom easier. But I'm just going to pull up. And then what's really fun about this is you can have them grow any direction you'd like. They're all going to be different heights. Just really light pressure. Some of them might curl down. And I'm going up above halfway on my canvas here. Add a little bit of a darker green in this grass too while it's wet. So with this color, I'm just going to darken it with a little bit more blue. Might just darken a little bit of it, not all of it, in case I want that lime green color for later. And again, I'm just going to wipe off that brush on the side of my palette so I don't have too much paint in there. Using that thin side of the brush, I'm not going to cover up all that lime green. I'm just going to add kind of short little lines on one side. So this is a good time to decide if you want left or right. In my case, I might just pick the left side here. I think that's a good start. So what I'll do here next is start the base of my tulips. So I'm going to clean my brush. And I'm going to move to my middle size, about 1/4 inch flat tip brush here. I'm just going to mix that nice coral pink that I want for my tulips. What's fun about this is you can make it any color you want, but I'll show how to mix that coral. It's kind of a complex color. So we're going to start with a big scoop of white, plop that on the palette, maybe about the size of a nickel there. I'm going to add a little bit of red, making that a nice light pink. Doesn't take much at all. And my secret ingredient here to make it coral is a tiny bit of yellow. If you add too much, it gets orange, so just a little bit. Kind of warms up that pink a little bit. And from here, you can decide if you want to add more pink to it, or red, to make it more pink. Just adding a little bit of red if you want to darken it, and then you can bounce and add some more yellow if needed. I just wanted to darken mine a little bit. Now for the tulips, I'm going to add maybe about a handful of them. So to get started, I'm going to start with a letter U at the top of some of these stems here. So maybe up here, I'm going to make a big U. And then to finish it, I'm going to make 3 bumps across the top. And I'm going to color that in. So we're going to go ahead and let that dry. In the meantime, we'll take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. We are in the middle of creating a very springy painting. We started with a background, and the next step here, we're going to add some flower pots. I'm going to do a terracotta color, and that's kind of a fun color to mix. I always think it's a little easier than it looks. I'm going to use that 3/4 flat tip brush because it will be a big shape here, so a bigger brush will be nice. I'm going to use 2 colors. I'm going to use orange and burnt sienna. So I'm going to start with a good old scoop of this orange. I'm going to plop that to the side. And I'm going to take a good scoop of that burnt sienna too. I'm going to mix plenty of this color. And what that does is kind of create like a burnt orange color. All right, so drawing out those flower pots. I'm going to start with the stacked flower pots that I want over here on the left side. What I always think is easier is drawing a center line. Then you can decide how tall the flower pots are going to be, and then it's easier to make it symmetrical left and right. So I'm going to start with 1 dot about 1/3 the way from the left here. And I'm just going to draw that center line going up until I'm approximately halfway up on my canvas. And I want 2 pots to be stacked on top of each other, so I'm going to use the brush vertically, making a nice wide brush stroke. And I'm going to come down maybe a couple inches from the top and pull that to the left, or to the right, and then to the left. Maybe about 3 inches to each side. This is going to determine how wide your pots are. And I'm going to make this a little bit taller as well. This is just the top of my flower pot. Nice big rectangle. Just trying my best here to make little clean corners. And then I'm going to make the walls of the flower pot. Now usually they kind of come in a little bit at the bottom. So just coming in a little bit from that top rim of the pot, I'm going to angle in just a little bit. And you can see this distance here over here. That's about where we want it to be as well. So we can make it nice and symmetrical. And then we're going to color this in. Nice long brush strokes up and down. This color can be a little see-through. So we can always do a couple coats, but at least those long brush strokes make it nice and consistent. Alrighty, so now I'm going to make the next pot. It's kind of stacked inside. I'm going to start with the top of the pot, exactly the same size as this guy. Just come up to the top of that line, and there will be a little bit of space between them. If not, that's fine too. They're just stacked a little bit closer. Come over, get the same length, color it in, nice long brush strokes all the way across. And we will be outlining this later too, so you don't have to worry too much about too clean of lines. I'm going to make the sides of that pot. They're going to come in a little bit and look like they should be able to nest inside this pot. So just a little line here, a little line there. We're going to color that space in between. And there we have it. Now I'm going to make a flower pot that's kind of tipped over. Bunny jumped in and it tipped over. So I'm going to start with the rim of the flower pot going straight up, and I want to leave a little bit of space because I want that little bunny butt sticking out later. So coming in about 3 inches, give or take, maybe about the width of my hand. If you want to use your hand to measure this one too, that might be helpful determining how tall that flower pot will be here. But I'm going to start with that rectangle. And now I'm going to draw a center line for this flower pot, making it a T going this way. So in the center, I'm going to draw that straight line over. And you know, you can make it whatever height you want. If you wanted to go behind these flower pots, I just want a little bit of space, so I'm just going to make it that tall right there. And maybe at the bottom, I'm going to draw this like an H shape, but I'm going to have a slight curve to it. Not as wide as the top of the flower pot here, because I do want that to angle up and just in a little bit from that end there. Do the same thing for the bottom. And then I'm going to color this in. Now, I can go ahead and do a second coat if it's dry. I'm going to start with this first one here. Now I'm going to clean off my brush just to get a fresh start. So now we can add the highlights. So I am going to be using that terracotta color, but I am going to add a little bit of white to brighten it up. So I'll just take a little bit of white to the side and add a little bit of that terracotta color. And again, I'm going to do a quick pull, but I'm going to do it on the opposite side as the shadow. So on the right side, do a pull down, maybe a couple times. And I'll go from the right side to the left to create that highlight around the top of the pot. Do the same thing for each flower pot there. And always take a step back, look at it, make sure it looks a little more three-dimensional than it did before. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush here, and I'm going to go back to those tulips with my middle-sized brush. Here I'm going to refine them a little bit so they don't look like pink globs. So I'm going to use kind of a red coral. I'm going to start with a good scoop of red and separate that on my palette. And I'm going to add a little bit of white to it, so it's more of like a magenta. And again, I'll add a tiny bit of yellow. And then I'll wipe off that extra paint. So with this is I'm going to almost kind of outline where that middle petal would be on our tulips. So I'm going to start with the middle of the bottom of the tulip and just kind of curve up to the left and up to the right, basically creating a V. And I'm also going to add one quick swipe on the edges of that flower, and I'm going to do that to each. I'm going to clean off my brush, and now I'm going to work on that little highlight that kind of brings it out a little bit more. So with just white, middle-sized brush there, that flat tip, I'm going to start from the top and just do a quick pull down on that right side of that middle petal and just kind of let it fade into the rest of the flower. And while I have that white in hand, I'm going to go ahead and start the first coat for my little bunnies. For the standing up pots here, I'd love to just have the little bunny ears popping out of the top. So with that, I'm going to use the white, and I'm going to start with my first ear. The first ear I want kind of standing up straight. I might have that second one folded over then. So with this, I'm going to make 2 dots where I want each of those ears kind of spaced out, maybe a couple inches apart towards the center of the pot. And my left ear, I'm going to make standing up tall, just basically a football shape. So I'm going to start with a center line again, angling it out a little bit, making your bunny ears as big as you want. And on the left and right side, I'm just going to curve it out and bring it back in at the bottom to create that football shape. And then I'm going to color it in nice long brush strokes. Now this color is going to be see-through, and that's okay. We're going to just put a nice even coat now, let it dry, and we'll be doing a second coat later. And next, we're going to make that folded ear, but this time it's going to be a little bit shorter because it's folded over. With that center line, we're going to go up about half the height of that first ear. And where that is, I'm going to have the same width over here. So we can start with a T. That's going to be where that fold is at. So now I know how to start the beginning of that bottom of the football, curving up to that left, curving up to that right. I'm going to go ahead and color that in. Might round these corners a little bit too. And now for the fold, it's going to be basically this long, how much of that other ear we're missing here. So I'm going to have it coming out and over out here. From this dot, I'm going to round it up to that far right corner. And this side, I'm going to smile all the way up to the opposite side, and I'm going to color that in. I'm going to kind of fluff up them a little bit, make them a little bit wider, bringing them a little bit closer together. And now for the bunny butt, he's kind of popping out of this pot here, that's why it's knocked over. So we're going to make just his backside here, nice rounded curve here. So just down a little bit, we're going to swoop over and back down. This is a little bit easier. So we're just going to go ahead and color it in, nice long brush strokes. Go right up to the pot, and we're going to add this little heel down here so we can have his little back foot, just a little bump out at the bottom, and he's going to have a little white cottontail, so we're going to just kind of dabble the brush around the back towards the lower part of them there. So just kind of dancing that around. Mine kind of goes off the edge of the canvas, and that'll work. All right, so we'll let that dry, so we'll take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. We are just about ready to finish up our springy little scene here. For the next step here, I'm going to add some pink into the bunny ears. Now, you can use whatever shade of pink you like. I do have some dark pink left from my tulips there, but I might just add a little bit of white to that. If you need to always mix some more pink, you could start with white and add a little bit of red. Just want it a little bit lighter, kind of more of a medium coral here. With this, I'm going to just basically create like a little bit smaller football through the middle here. So starting from the bottom, bringing it in just a little bit from that edge, and back down and coloring it in. And for the next one, it's going to be a little bit more tricky just because it's a little folded. So we just have to remember where that fold is. We want the fold to come forward. So I'm going to start with a little line right underneath that fold. And then I'm just going to kind of mimic the curve of the ear coming down to the center bottom and coloring it in. All right, go ahead and clean off your brush. And for the next step, we're going to go ahead and do some outlining. This is just going to refine it all. We can kind of break it all apart versus looking like big blobs. So with the outlining, I do like to use my middle-sized brush. It holds more paint, just a nice flat brush here, but you can always use that really tiny brush as well. That is definitely easier for beginners. But either way, I'm going to take some black to the side, and watering it down is going to be helpful. So let's take that brush, dip it in our cup of water, mix in that water from our brush, watering it down a little bit. Now we just want it to be a little bit more fluid. We don't want it too runny. Then it doesn't write as nice, then it's actually too watery. But if you practice a line on your palette, it should write nice and clean. So with this, I'm just going to use really light pressure. Also moving a little quicker helps too. I always think of it, you have less time to wiggle. I'm going to start with the flower pots here. So nice straight lines. Woohoo! Everybody loves those. We're going to take that light pressure and we're going to go around each top part of the pot. My next step with outlining is going to be the ears. So really light pressure, I'm going to go around the outer part of the white. And the next step is optional. You can do a little bit of like fluffy outlining around the pink of the ear. So just kind of use that brush, kind of dabble it. And that about does it for the outlining. Not too much with this one. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush, and I'm going to bring a little bit more grass into it. This is going to help set those pots back a little bit, make it actually look like they're sitting in the ground. With the grass this time, I'm going to make it a little bit darker than the grass in the background. So with that middle-sized brush here, I'm going to start with a good scoop of yellow again. Got some pink in there, and that's okay. Sometimes I like let the colors mix. It gets cool colors in there. Add a little bit of more blue this time than we did in the background. So I got a nice, almost grass green here. And I do want to darken it a little bit more with a little bit of black. Adding that little bit of black also makes it a little more opaque, less see-through. All right, so just like we did in the beginning, again, we're using that middle-sized brush here. We're just going to use it standing up and do soft flicks up so that that grass just naturally comes to a little point. I am going to focus right in front of this pot here. As you see, it looks a little bit like it's floating. So I'm going to add enough grass here so you cannot see that sky that shouldn't be there. So I'm just going to dance across the whole thing. I am going to add a little bit of white to this color now, so I'm not even going to clean my brush, just add some white. Then I have a lighter green again. And with this, I'm just going to highlight that little bit of grass in the front here, so just around the tops. Next, I'm going to clean off my brush. And my final step here is to add a little bit of shadow to that close grass as well. So with a little bit of that watered down black, if you need to mix more, go ahead and do that. We're still using that middle-sized brush here. I'm just going to add a little bit of black lines into that grass. So not too much. Remember that same direction as our grass is kind of important to keep here. Kind of more towards the bottom. And you can see that kind of brings it out a little bit from the background there. All right, but before you think you're done with a masterpiece, an artist always signs their work. I always like using that tiny brush here. You can sign with whatever color you like. I'm gonna go with a pink here. I started with black, but I decided pink. And I always like to sign that lower corner, but I don't want to hide too much of them, so I might just kind of go in front of this flower pot here. And there we have it. Well, thank you for following along with me, Mercedes, at the Captured on Canvas studio. We'll see you next time on Picture This.
Give it a minute.